My name is Cheryl, and I am a second-year PhD student at the Institute of Medical Science at the University of Toronto. And today I'll be presenting on the first of three aims of my PhD research, which resulted in a set of theories, models, and frameworks for supporting youth engagement in health research. So this presentation is organized into 5 parts, 5 familiar parts. So background, methods, results, and some key findings, and finally concluding with conclusions and recommendations. To start off, I think it's important that we have a shared understanding of what youth engagement in research means. So it's really a broad concept used to describe a wide array of practices and approaches to involving youth in research beyond mere participation as a human subject. So that last part is really key. So in health research, we have been recruiting youth as participants for as long as I can remember, for a long, long time. But the concept of involving youth in research as partners or sharing that power between researchers and youth partners is really a relatively new concept. And before gaining popularity in health research, youth engagement has been the focus of civic engagement studies and political participation studies for at least 40 years. Its origins can be traced back to social movements and youth organizing, wherein young people are seen as drivers of social change. And it's really embodied in this core philosophy. So the slogan, "Nothing about us without us," that was popularized by advocacy and activism among disabled populations, and more popularly with the AIDS epidemic. So here is just a crude representation of really how research on youth engagement has exploded in the last 20 years, particularly in the last 10 years in health research. So in 2022 alone, as of today, there have been 353 studies that were published that are focused on or that have integrated youth engagement in their research. Personally, my interest in this subject matter started in this study for co-designing youth vaping cessation interventions that's funded by Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program, or SUAP. So this study started in 2019, which is when I formally got involved in the youth engagement in research field. And since then, we've developed 2 interventions for and by youth that are called Postcards from the Future and Stop Vaping Challenge. And we've done other studies as well that have been presented in other conferences, such as this one, looking at changes in youth vaping associated with COVID-19 pandemic. This one describes our persona development process for the development of interventions. And for me, transitioning from this work to my own PhD research, I was specifically interested in how do we ensure that our approaches are ethical and evidence informed. So clearly, youth engagement is a stated priority for funding institutions, for research decision makers, and hospitals. So there's been a lot of push to do youth engagement, but not as much guidance into how to do youth engagement that's ethical and evidence informed. And for us at the where I'm based at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, or CAMH, we also know that our youth partners prefer the term youth engagement over patient engagement. But I see it as very similar and very related in that youth engagement is essentially patient engagement among youth populations. So that led us to this systematic review that with the primary research question asking, what are the theories and elements that underpin youth engagement in health research? And further to add a critical perspective, we also asked, how is youth engagement understood to work in theory compared to how it has worked in practice? So looking at hypothesized benefits or hypothesized implementation versus actual implementation. For this, I'm not going to go into too much detail on the search strategy, but these are also, I'm hoping, familiar methods for people here. And also this paper is near completion, so please watch out, and we describe the methods here in detail. But we searched 6 academic databases, as well as did hand searches and ancestry and snowball searches. So we looked at the reference lists of papers that were identified to be relevant. And we also looked at papers that cited each of those relevant papers identified. We also searched the gray literature databases, and our search terms were relevant terms for youth engagement in research. So we defined youth as that age 10 to 24 following the WHO World Health Organization definition, but we were more concerned with conceptual definitions over technical definitions. So for example, for engagement, these were some of the terms that are used interchangeably in the literature. So that's engagement, involvement, participation, and within that, there's, patient engagement research, patient-oriented research, patient-centered research, and more recently, co-design and co-production. So these are our methods. Again, I won't go into too much detail, but watch out for that paper. So we also specified the differences between a theory, a model, and framework. For the purposes of this presentation, we'll just accept that there are differences. And these are the results. So we identified more than 1,000 records. So here it says 1,145. And that resulted in 98 papers that met inclusion criteria. After applying exclusion criteria, we were left with 13 papers that described 20 theoretical approaches. So there were a couple of papers that were review papers, so that had multiple frameworks within them. Also, there were some papers, theoretical papers with multiple frameworks. So this is a distribution of those 13 papers. So 6 were from the United States, 4 from Canada. So majority of them really are from North America. And the earliest one is 1992, which is Hart's Ladder, and the latest is from 2021. So for our key findings, there were 3 categories of those. So first is a taxonomy of models and frameworks. So this is a classification of models and frameworks that were identified. Second, are motivations stated for engaging youth in research. So there are 5 of those. And 5 is evidence. The third one is evidence of use. This presentation is focused on the taxonomy of models and frameworks. I will say that early on, we found right away that there is very limited theoretical work in the field of not just youth engagement, but patient engagement in general. So the systematic review pivoted into classifying the frameworks that we found. So the green ones are categories that we adopted from that review by Dr. Greenhall and team. So power focused, process focused, and the third and fourth one were classifications of frameworks that we developed ourselves upon recognition that the categories from Dr. Greenhall's team were insufficient for the models that we had identified in this review. So starting on power-focused frameworks, I'll just provide a few examples here. So again, the most famous of all youth engagement frameworks and also the earliest youth engagement framework is Hart's Ladder. And it's really quite astonishing that there have been several frameworks in between, but the most recent framework that we identified in 2021 is also sort of a modernized version of Hart's Ladder. So here they are next to each other for comparison. So the main critique for Hart's Ladder is that it conceptualizes youth engagement in a linear way. So there are degrees of youth participation, youth engagement, and we want them at the top fully leading a research project. So if you've noticed here, power-focused frameworks, they emphasize identifying, describing, and explaining the allocation of power and control between youth and adult researchers in academic research. There are other ones. So this is the type pyramid. So here clearly we can see the difference between the ladder and this pyramid where the goal or the pinnacle is shared control between adult researchers and youth partners. So that's quite interesting to see. The next one are process-focused frameworks, which the emphasis for these frameworks is on describing barriers, facilitators, and other factors affecting youth engagement in research. So they identify recommendations, principles, and methods for engaging youth in research. So these frameworks answer the how to engage youth in research. This is the McCain model, which based on our ancestry and snowball searches was the most cited so far. So here you can see that they conceptualize the time. So the arrows describe the time, on the left and right, the time for the duration for engaging youth in research, and the arrows inside the concentric circles describe different layers of organizational, individual, structural factors in youth engagement. This is another process-focused framework. It's quite straightforward. So it identified 7 Ps. So 7 Ps that are relevant to youth engagement research, and then have guiding questions for academic researchers. The third one, which is the first one, the first category that is our own category, is the impact-focused frameworks. So this is a great example of that. It's the 8-bar 6-phase model. 8 bars stands for engage, identify, plan, act, research, reflect, reward, and sustain. So here we can see 3 circles where impact of youth engagement is seen or to look for. So there's the project, the small layer of the project. So the youth who are directly involved in the research, there's that sort of widens or broadens into societal impact for youth engagement. So this is an example of an impact-focused framework. It tells us where to look for the impact or the benefits of youth engagement. And the last one are equity-focused frameworks. So these frameworks focus on identifying and proposing alternative approaches to conventional academic research methods that may be incompatible with or hindrance to fulfilling the objectives and principles of youth engagement and research. So these are the newest frameworks. We were only able to identify 2 equity-focused frameworks. So this is one of them, the Youth Participation Approaches Decision Tree And the second one is the YPAR 2.0 model of research engagement. So here we can see the juxtaposition between neoliberal approaches, so Western conventional positivist approaches to research, and a bottom-up model of research. So this review led us to two conclusions. The first one is, again, there's limited theoretical work in the development of frameworks and models for supporting arguments for youth engagement. And they're often focused on ethical and democratic principles. The second one is many models for youth engagement. There are many models for youth engagement, and some frameworks are more suitable for a specific purpose and a set of research questions than others. And often it's necessary to combine multiple frameworks. So for our contribution based on this systematic review, we developed this flowchart for guiding researchers out there for identifying what framework to use based on the aims of their research. So first, identify purpose, identify research questions, and from there, we have the 4 categories based on the taxonomy that was developed. And then you have that list of frameworks. Our goal for this is to have a website where all the frameworks are there, and people, researchers specifically, can easily identify those frameworks. So that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I also have a list of references that if you're interested in, I can share based on this presentation. Thank you.